How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this week's Q&A, and this is episode 50. So I want to thank each and every one of you. Some of you have been with me even before I started this series. Some of you are pretty recent subscribers. So regardless, there's multiple of you that are commenting pretty frequently, pretty often, watching most of these episodes, and I highly appreciate it. And even if you don't comment, I appreciate the views. That obviously it matters and it helps support the channel 100%. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this week's video. And the first question is, should you be buying new versus certified versus used versus maybe a used car lot or from an independent seller? And that really depends on the situation, right? Some people want to go ahead and purchase brand new from a dealer. Now, the only downside to that is you're going to lose a lot of money the minute you sign that contract and you drive the vehicle out of that dealer. Now, chances are you'll probably be problem-free for the most part at that point. And even if you run into an issue, obviously, it'll be covered by warranty 99 out of 100 times. So, second option would be buying something certified. So obviously you won't take as much of a hit when purchasing that vehicle because the initial hit was already done as far as losing money or depreciation. So somebody probably owned that vehicle. The only issue I see here is obviously interest rates will be higher. Used car interest rates are just higher. There's not offers and stuff like that. And there may be some neglect that won't be documented, and sometimes the dealers will try to hide this. Other times there's really no way to tell. So you have to kind of just see and decide what works best for you at that point. Now, if you're buying from an independent seller or a used car lot, that's where I would be more cautious. If something were to go wrong, chances are if you buy from an independent person, then they might not have known about it and probably can't help you if you do run across an issue, nor should they be, liable to do that unless if it's something that they deliberately, hid. And sometimes it's hard to say which one is which. So used car lots, I see a ton of bad experiences with these. They try to hide a lot of things. Obviously, they're buying these cars with the intent to flip them. So they do minimum work or maintenance to them before they go and sell it to somebody else. Now, obviously, there are good used car lots out there. Do your research, do a Google review on them, search into them, search into that place, see if other customers have had issues with them. Obviously, you cannot make everybody happy. But if there seems to be a big trend, and this could even apply to new car dealers themselves, then obviously you want to stay away from that place and maybe look somewhere else. If the price is too good to be true, chances are it is too good to be true. If you're buying from one of these lots or an independent seller, pay somebody to go with you, test drive the vehicle thoroughly, do your research, see what some common issues are for those vehicles, like a channel just like this one, to kind of see and be alert of some of the issues you may run into with that particular vehicle. And pay somebody to go with you. You rather pay $100, $150 and lose out on that money versus you possibly getting scammed, and having to deal with the issue and cost you hundreds of dollars, maybe even $1,000 after the fact. So that would be my suggestion for that, and hopefully that answers the question for you. So this next question is regarding to the Honda V6J series rod bearing recall, and some people are saying that some of the non-affected vehicles are coming in with some rod bearing issues and Honda is not deciding to help them. I haven't ran into that situation just yet. And just because this is the initial recall does not mean that there won't be an extended VIN expansion at some point. I'm not sure. This is the very early stages of this recall. Now, we know going back to the Takata recall that initially it was just a couple cars, then it kept adding cars and cars and cars, and now it expanded to basically the whole lineup of that era. So it's very possible that this may get expanded into more vehicles or VINs or whatever the case may be. Now, if you do have one of these affected vehicles, you're gonna have to bring it in, and the process is pretty complex. Now we have to input the serial number of the engine and the engine code into the system, and we forward that into the system, and the system will essentially tell us what to do. At that point, it'll tell us either it's good or you need to proceed with a couple different procedures. Once we inspect it, most of them will be you have to remove the oil pan, take out the rod bearings, inspect them, send pictures to Honda, and then Honda from there tells us what to do, whether it be bearing replacements, whether it be a crankshaft, whether it be a short block. It's very complex, and it's not just, hey, I know this may be an issue, I want a new block. It's just not going to happen that way. It's a lot of hoops to jump through. And if you're a tech, you can go ahead and chime in over here. I've only done one so far, and I'm in a process of actually doing it currently. And I'm to the point where there's some hot spots on the bearings, and I had to, go back and forth with Honda and kind of see what they want to do at that point. I don't make the calls. The technicians don't make the calls. Honda is making the calls here. Now, if you have one of these vehicles with a situation that you do have a raw knock, those are probably going to be prioritized. If it's not part of the recall, doesn't mean it won't be covered if you have warranty or extended warranty at that point. It won't be covered by the recall, although warranty or your extended warranty would most likely pick that up. Now, if you're out of warranty, at that point, you may want to contact Honda and see if they could assist you in any way, shape, or form. The best way to get assistance from Honda is to have documentation of maintenance. So that's very important, whether it be oil changes, transmission services, tire rotations, whatever the case may be. The more you could prove to them that you have maintained the vehicle in a fairly decent shape and way, then the better chances you have of them having, your back and kind of just helping you through the process. Maybe that'll be some sort of a split or something like that. These are, again, the very early stages of this recall. Priority is going to be obviously the cars that are knocking and or have catastrophic failure at this point. Get those cars back on the road to those customers. My own personal Pilot does have this recall. I'm not really in a rush to get it done at this point. I'm not having any issues with it or anything like that. Eventually, obviously, I'm going to go ahead and do it, but I want to kind of see how the process plays out here and kind of go from there at that point. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, the next question is valve adjustment. Is it needed, and when should you be doing it? And absolutely, it is needed. In most cases, there will not be an issue until it's too late. And then at that point, it's either misfiring because the valves are too tight, or you have a burnt valve because they were too tight for too long. So that's kind of the scenarios that we see here. A couple years back, maybe like a decade ago, we had a whole bunch of cars coming right from the factory with extra tight valves. And, all we had to do was just, adjust them to the spec that they needed to be, and they were good from there. Now, when I do a valve adjustment, typically I'm looking for tight valves, and obviously those I'll loosen. And then the looser valves, I'll just make them a little bit tight because they do have a tendency to sink into the head, which does cause the tight valve effect. So if you don't get to them, you eventually lead to a misfire, which eventually could lead to a burnt valve, which will cost you a lot of money. And obviously nobody wants to deal with that. So I would recommend personally right around 100,000 miles, start thinking about doing your valve adjustment, unless if there's a need to do it earlier. Doesn't mean that at exactly 100,000 miles, you have to do your valve adjustment, but just a good rule of thumb. If you're not driving a vehicle, then you don't need to do it. It's not one of the things that you need to do by time or anything like that, unless if you do a ton of idle time. And even that, I would just stick to majority of the times doing around 100 or 105, 110,000 miles or so. Kind of start thinking about doing it at that point. Now, the new J30 AC does not need valve adjustments. They have a different setup. So if you have one of these newer Pilots or TLX Type S or MDX Type S, that is a thing of the past for you guys. So that is no longer needed for those vehicles. But basically, every other Honda engine, you're going to want to do it around 100,000 miles. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, this next question is, neglecting your vehicle, can this lead to a domino effect? And the simple answer is absolutely. Let's just use the example here of a bad engine mount. Now, let's say it's a right front engine mount. Typically, that's the one that fails first. If you don't get to that one with a reasonable time, then that means all the other mounts are under more stress and load because that one mount, it's not doing their part of the job. So typically we'll see the right front blow first, and then the front engine mount go secondly, and then the other ones, kind of in a counterclockwise type of scenario. So Doesn't always happen exactly that way, but that's just what we see most of the times. Additionally to that, intake tubes, we see a lot of torn intake tubes. Now they get brittle and hard over time. Rubber kind of turns into plastic with a heat explosion and stuff like that. So we will see torn intake boots. Now they will tear on their own, but if the engine is flexing a lot, then the chances are it's going to tear at that point more easily. So again, just using kind of that as a scenario. Now, other things can happen. If your harness is tight anywhere, it could pull the harness. If it gets to that point of it being extremely bad, it could put extra pressure on your radiator and stuff like that. Just one of the examples. Another one would be, not changing your oil on time. Initially, nothing will happen, and a simple oil change, I believe in my dealer, were between $70 and $80, which does sound like a lot, but it's a lot easier to do a $70, $80 oil change every 3,000 to 5,000 miles versus doing, let's say, a piston ring job or anything like that. So that would be in a long-term effect what we see cars obviously building some sludge and then leading to oil consumption, blowing turbos and stuff like that. So if you just do your maintenance on time, and when an issue arises, try to get to it within a reasonable time. If you don't have the money, just prioritize the issue over maintenance at that point. But you don't want to neglect the maintenance, either. So, but if there is an issue, and when I do a multi-point on a vehicle, I'll kind of prioritize to the customer if they choose to ask me, hey, what's more important or what should I be doing? And regardless, I'll usually state it in my multi-point video that this is a priority. This can wait a little bit. Your brakes are at 4. You're going to need them, within the next couple of months or, whatever the situation may be, depending how you drive. But your engine mount is broken. You should be doing this one, and the brakes will keep an eye on them kind of as you come back for your oil change. So that's how I would personally deal with it. And hopefully that answers the question for you. Last but not least, question of the week. And once again, if you want a chance of one of your questions being answered, make sure you do drop a comment down below. And the question is, what should you be lubing when doing brakes, brake service, etc.? So typically, what I look for when doing a brake job or a brake service is obviously you don't want any tears on either the slide pin boots or the caliper piston or pistons themselves. So if any of those have an issue, you're going to want to address that. Now, doesn't mean that you immediately have a seized pin or a piston that will not go back in, although obviously it's going to get some water in there and eventually it will seize up. So you're also going to want to make sure that your pad slides in the shims nice and smoothly. In this area, we see a lot of rust building between the caliper bracket and the shim itself. So you're going to want to go ahead and take that out, break up the whatever rust amount is there, and then put it back in so the caliper fits in there nice and smoothly and moves so as easy as possible. When they're not smooth, they basically hold in place, and then they're applying pressure to your brake rotor at all times, obviously reducing some performance, decreasing your fuel economy, and going through the brake pads faster than they need to. So just a couple of things that we look for. If you have drum brakes, then I just apply some Molly coat to the contact points where they pivot at that point, and make sure the wheel cylinders aren't leaking or anything like that. The boots aren't torn. Typically not much goes on in there, and drum brakes are a thing of the past at this point. So typically we deal with four-wheel disc brakes all the way around. You also want to make sure when changing your rotors that you are cleaning the hubs thoroughly. You don't have to go crazy if it's just a little surface rust, but if you see any high spots, you want to chisel those away and then kind of sand them down with a wheel and just kind of get all that rust out of there. So when you put the rotor back in, there's not a high spot and causing a wavy type of scenario, causing you a whole bunch of vibrations, noises, and etc. Now, for the slide pins, I like to personally use silicone paste. That's what I use. Do not use anti-seize. That stuff gets hard over time, and it will make the pins not smooth and essentially give you the same scenario as if the pins were seized. So you don't want to do that. And for the pad contacts itself, I use a Molly coat that works really well for me, and I don't have any issues. I don't have any comebacks with noises or anything like that, unless if the car sit over time and the brake pad sticks to it, which is a whole nother issue. So that would just be how I would address contact points and inspections and stuff like that. Obviously, if there is a leak, you want to address it ASAP. You do not want to have a car leaving out of there with a leak of any sort in the brake system. So that being said, hopefully I answered the question for you, and I'll catch everyone on the next one.